Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into a question that's really come back into focus lately.
Mm,
Is America under threat by Iran? With recent military actions and intelligence leaks, it's definitely back on the front burner.
it really is.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to explore two, well, compelling narratives that come straight from the source material you shared with us.
Right.
We're going to try and unpack this idea, this potential for Iran to maybe pull off a surprise attack, an unprecedented one, on U.S. soil.
Which sounds pretty dramatic.
It does. And then we'll look at the other angle, this intriguing possibility that the nuclear sites the U.S. hit recently, maybe they're just the tip of the iceberg for Iran's weapons program.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how these particular narratives, they really challenge the sort of conventional wisdom, don't they? They push us to look beyond what seems obvious.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at, well, a mix of things, speculation, some conspiracy theories, sure, but also documented covert stuff. And the goal, like always, is just to pull out the key insights from the material, lay out the ideas and the sources for you. We're not taking sides here.
Absolutely not. Just presenting the information.
Mm.
Okay, so let's dive into that first really bold claim. Could Iran actually strike America's homeland?
It's a big question.
Because historically, when Iran retaliates, it's almost always been, U.S. bases in the Middle East.
Right. Either directly or using proxies. You mentioned Hezbollah, the Houthis, the PMF. That's the usual playbook.
But what if that playbook changes?
Well, that's where this other idea comes in. It's been bubbling up in, let's say, certain online forums, unofficial analysis circles.
Okay.
A theory, basically, that suggests Iran has quietly built up some kind of network, one capable of launching a covert attack, maybe not even a traditional military one, right here on U.S. soil.
So not necessarily missiles flying over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Could be cyber attacks, maybe something biochemical, maybe even, activating sleeper cells that have been put in place.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting looking at the source details. There's no public proof, obviously,
Yeah.
but people who push this theory point to a few things mentioned in the material we looked at. First, these allegations, right, about Hezbollah cells, identified in Latin America, and allegedly maybe even parts of the U.S.
Which feeds into that whole long-term sleeper agent strategy concern, agents hidden for years, potentially.
Yeah, potentially. Embedded, waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Second, Iran's espionage game. Well, it's not new. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Oh, yeah.
They're widely believed to run covert networks, gather intel, especially in Europe, the Middle East. That's pretty established.
Definitely.
And third, this idea of an impossible strike.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not about military force in the usual sense.
Right. Like you said, maybe it's coordinated internal disruption.
Think cyber attacks, knocking out power grids, maybe targeting specific political figures, or even using misinformation to, stir up massive civil unrest.
If anything like that were to happen, the shock alone it would completely reshape global security thinking overnight.
Totally.
Deterrence calculations would be out the window. The U.S. would probably have to revert to almost Cold War levels of homeland security focus.
It's a paradigm shift.
A complete paradigm shift, yeah. It's not just about a new way to attack, it's about how the definition of war itself might be changing, Moving beyond battlefields, it forces strategists to really consider threats they might have dismissed as, well, science fiction before.
It's a chilling thought, definitely. But, okay, let's ground this a bit. How realistic is any of this? What's stopping it from being more than just a theory floating around?
Well, from a practical standpoint, a full-scale kinetic strike,
Right.
Traditional military attack with missiles hitting the U.S. mainland.
Yeah.
Iran's current military just doesn't have that reach. We're talking missile range limits, their navy isn't comparable, plus constant satellite surveillance. It's highly, highly unlikely.
And the response would be?
Catastrophic for them. The risk of just total annihilation, that's a massive restraint on the leadership in Tehran. They know that.
Okay, however, and this seems like the key point, hybrid warfare. That's different. Espionage, cyber attacks, propaganda, those are active threats, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're persistent, they're evolving. And that's exactly why this theory, this possibility of a non-traditional attack, it just keeps kind of lingering, in the strategic back channels and defense discussions. It doesn't completely go away.
Right. Which brings us actually pretty neatly to the second narrative we wanted to explore.
Okay.
So back on June 18th, the U.S. hit some Iranian missile and weapons sites.
Yeah.
Retaliation for regional stuff.
Yep, I remember the reports.
some observers are floating this idea. Maybe those sites weren't the only ones,
Yeah.
or maybe not even the most important ones.
Ah, the decoy idea.
Yeah, could they have been just a decoy?
So this leads into what some call the deep underground facility theory. The basic idea is that Iran's really advanced weapons work, maybe the most critical parts of their program, are hidden. Deep underground, maybe under mountains, maybe even disguised inside ordinary civilian buildings.
And this isn't totally unprecedented, is it? I remember the Fordo facility.
Exactly. Fordo was built deep under a mountain, thought to be, basically impenetrable secret, until Western intelligence agencies finally exposed it. So there's a history there.
So what's the evidence, or I guess the arguments, that supporters of this theory point to now? Why do they think this might be happening again?
Well, they usually highlight a few things. First, Iran's track record. They have a documented history of, let's say, deception when it comes to nuclear talks and military disclosures. It's not like they've always been transparent.
Fair point.
Second, the argument you mentioned, maybe the U.S. strikes deliberately targeted places that were visible, maybe even somewhat expendable, to create a kind of smokescreen, making it look like significant damage was done.
A calculated move, potentially, on both sides.
Potentially. And third, the suggestion is that the real cutting-edge facilities could be somewhere totally new, somewhere intelligence hasn't picked up on yet.
How will they hide them?
Could be anything from sophisticated satellite obfuscation ways to fool spy satellites, to using dummy heat signatures, maybe planting false intelligence trails to mislead people.
Wow.
It raises this really fundamental question, doesn't it? What if what we see, what intelligence picks up, isn't the whole story? What if the real picture is hidden?
Yeah.
And the insight there isn't just about Iran maybe being deceptive. It's also kind of humbling for intelligence agencies worldwide. In this age of advanced tech for concealment, what you don't know could actually be way more dangerous than what you do. It creates this sort of permanent uncertainty.
So, okay, let's game this out. If this theory actually holds water, if there are significant hidden facilities, then America's assessment of the damage done in those June strikes, it might be way off.
Precisely.
What does that mean strategically?
Well, the consequences could be pretty profound, quite serious. For one, it would mean Iran's real ability to retaliate might still be fully intact, maybe even stronger than we think, despite the U.S. strikes.
So they weren't weakened as much as reported?
Or they're just playing the long game, right?
Right.
Pretending to be hurt, licking their wounds publicly, while secretly they're still building up maybe next-gen missiles, maybe even pushing towards nuclear warheads in secret.
Which means the global intelligence community could be fundamentally misled.
Yes, underestimating the future risk. And that could lead to a nasty surprise down the line. Imagine a second or third wave of Iranian retaliation, maybe months later, that's far more powerful than anyone expected because they thought the capability was gone.
That sounds like a recipe for miscalculation.
Huge miscalculation. And that kind of misstep could have, well, catastrophic results. It could potentially drag the U.S. into a much bigger, longer regional war with way higher stakes than anticipated.
Okay, so let's try and pull these two threads together now. We started with the big question. Is America under threat by Iran? And if you just look at the open source intel, the conventional stuff, the answer might seem like, well, not directly, not in the homeland.
Seems that way on the surface.
But then you step into these murky waters we've been discussing. Espionage, misinformation, secret military buildups, hybrid tactics. And suddenly that line between what's, dismissed as conspiracy and what's actually possible, it gets really blurry.
It does, and I think the distinction is key. It's still highly unlikely, based on current capabilities, that Iran can or will launch a traditional military strike on U.S. soil. That part seems clear.
Right.
But those non-traditional threats, cyber warfare, internal disruption, proxies, those remain very real. They're persistent. They're evolving.
And on the second point, the hidden facilities.
Similarly, yeah, the U.S. strikes definitely weakened some known Iranian sites. That's verifiable. But given Iran's secrecy, their history of deception, it strongly suggests there could be much more going on beneath the surface that we just don't see.
So ignoring these possibilities entirely, that seems like a mistake.
It would be underestimating a very determined and, frankly, strategic adversary. You have to consider these less conventional angles.
So vigilance is key, but not paranoia.
Exactly. As these geopolitical tensions keep simmering or even rising, continued vigilance, just keeping your eyes open to all possibilities, not getting panicked, that's probably the best approach. It's about understanding potential threats, not succumbing to fear-mongering.
Right. It's a crucial distinction.
Really is.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on after this deep dive. As you process these layers of what we might call shadow threats,
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself this.
Mm-hmm.
How much of what we think